Jessica spoke without turning. "The Reverend Mother is waiting in my morning room. Please hurry." The Reverend Mother, Gaius Helen Mohiam, sat in a tapestried chair watching mother and son approach. Windows on each side of her overlooked the curving southern bend of the river and the green farmlands of the Atreides family. But the Reverend Mother ignored the view. She was feeling her age this morning, more than a little petulant. She blamed it on space travel in association with the abominable Spacing Guild and its secretive ways. But here was a mission that required personal attention from a Bene Gesserit with the sight. Even the Padishah Emperor's truthsayer couldn't evade the responsibility when duty called. "Damn that Jessica," Reverend Mother thought. "If only she'd borne us a girl like she was ordered to." Jessica stopped 3 paces from the chair, dropped a small curtsy, a gentle flick of the left hand along the line of her skirt. Paul gave the short bow the dancing master had taught, the one used when in doubt of another's station. The nuance of Paul's greeting were not lost on the Reverend Mother. She said, "He is a cautious one, Jessica." Jessica's hand went to Paul's shoulder, tightening there for a heartbeat. Fear pulsed through her palm. Then she had herself under control. "Thus he has been taught, your reverence." What is it she feared? Paul wondered. The old woman studied Paul in one gestaltant flicker. Face oval like Jessica's, but strong bones, hair, the Duke's black and black, but with a brow line of the maternal grandfather who cannot be named. And then that thin, disdainful nose, shape of directly glaring green eyes, like the old Duke, the paternal grandfather who is now dead. Now, there is a man who appreciated the power of bravada, even in death, the Reverend Mother thought. "Teaching is one thing," she said. "The basic ingredient is another. We shall see." The old eyes darted a hard glance at Jessica. "Leave us. I enjoin you to practice the meditation of peace." Jessica took her hand from Paul's shoulder. "Your Reverence, Jessica, you know what must be done." Paul looked at his mother, puzzled. Jessica straightened. "Yes, of course." Paul looked back at the Reverend Mother. Politeness and his mother's obvious awe of this old woman argued caution, yet he felt an angry apprehension at the fear he sensed radiating from his mother. "Paul," Jessica took a deep breath, "this test you're about to receive, it's important to me." "Test?" He looked up at her. "Remember, you're a Duke's son," Jessica said. She whirled and strode from the room in a dry swishing of a skirt. The door closed solidly behind her. Paul faced the old woman, holding his anger in check. "Does one dismiss the Lady Jessica as though she were a common serving wench?" A smile flicked the corners of the wrinkled old mouth. "The Lady Jessica was my serving wench, lad. 14 years at school," she nodded, "and a good one, too. Now, you come here." The command whipped out at him, and Paul found himself obeying before he could even think about it. "She's using the voice on me," he thought. He stopped at her gesture, standing beside her knees. "You see this?" she asked. From the folds of her gown she lifted a green metal cube, about 15 centimeters on a side. She turned it, and Paul saw that one side was open, black, and oddly frightening. No light penetrated that open blackness. "Put your hand in the box," she said. Fear shot through Paul. He started to back away, but the old woman said, "Is this how you obey your mother?" He looked at the bird-bright eyes. Slowly, feeling the compulsions and unable to inhibit them, Paul put his hand into the box. He felt first a sense of cold as the blackness closed around his hand, and then slick metal against his fingers, and a prickling as though his hand were asleep. A predatory look filled the old woman's features. She lifted her right hand away from the box and poised the hand close to the side of Paul's neck. He saw a glint of metal there and started to turn toward it. "Stop!" she snapped, using the voice again. He swung his attention back to her face. "I hold at your neck the Gum Jabbar," she said. "The Gum Jabbar, the high-handed enemy. It's a needle with a drop of poison on its tip. Ah, don't pull your hand away or you will feel that poison." Paul tried to swallow in a dry throat. He could not take his attention away from the seamed old face, the glinting eyes, the pale gums around silvery metal teeth that flashed as he spoke. "A duke's son must know of poisons," she said. "The way of the times, eh? Musky to be poisoned in your drink, umas to be poisoned in your food, the quick ones, the slow ones, and the ones in between. Here's a new one for you, the Gum Jabbar. It only kills animals." Pride overcame Paul's fear. "You dare suggest a duke's son is an animal?" he demanded. "Let us say I suggest you may be human," she says. "Steady, I warn you not to try jerking away. I am old, but my hand can drive this needle into your neck before you can escape me." "Who are you?" he whispered. "How did you trick my mother into leaving me alone with you? Are you from the Harkonnens?" "The Harkonnens? Bless me, no. Now, be silent." A dry finger touched his neck as he instilled the involuntary urge to leap away. "Good," she said. "You passed the first test. Now, here's the way of the rest. If you withdraw your hand from the box, you die. This is the only rule. Keep your hand in the box and you live. Withdraw it and die." Paul took a deep breath to still his trembling. "If I call out, there will be servants on you in seconds and you'll die." "Servants will not pass your mother, who stands guard outside the door. Depend on it. Your mother survived this test. Now it is your turn. Be honored. We seldom administer this to men children." Curiosity reduced Paul's fear to a manageable level. He heard truth in the old woman's voice, no denying it. If his mother stood guard out there, if this were truly a test, and whatever it was, he knew himself caught in it, trapped by the hand at his neck, the Gum Jabbar. He recalled the response from the litany against fear his mother had taught him out of the Bene Gesserit rites. "I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over and through me. And when it is gone, past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain." He felt his calmness return and said, "Get on with it, old woman." "Old woman," she snapped. "You've courage, and that there can't be any doubt. Well, let's see, Sirrah." She bent close, lowered her voice almost to a whisper. "You will feel pain in this hand within the box. Pain. But withdraw the hand, and I'll touch your neck with my Gum Jabbar. The death so swift, it's like the fall of the headsman's axe. Withdraw your hand, and the Gum Jabbar takes you. Understand?" "What's in the box?" "Pain." He felt an increased tingling in his hand, pressed his lips tightly together. How could this be a test, he wondered. The tingling became an itch. The old woman said, "You've heard of animals chewing off the leg to escape a trap? There's an animal kind of trick. A human could remain in the trap, endure the pain, feigning death that he might kill the trapper and remove the threat to his kind." The itch became the faintest of burning. "Why are you doing this?" he demanded. "To determine if you are human. Be silent." Paul clenched his left hand into a fist as the burning sensation increased in the other hand. It mounted slowly, heat upon heat upon heat. He felt the fingernails of his free hand biting the palm. He tried to flex the fingers of the burning hand, but couldn't move them. "It burns," he whispered. "Silence!" Pain throbbed up his arm. Sweat stood out on his forehead. Every fiber cried out to withdraw the hand from that burning pit. But the Gum Jabbar, without turning his head, he tried to move his eyes and see the terrible needle poised beside his neck. He sensed what he thought was he was breathing in gasps, and tried to slow his breaths, but he couldn't. Pain. His world emptied of everything except his hand immersed in agony, the ancient face inches away from him. His lips were dry, so dry he had difficulty separating them. The burning, the burning. He thought he could feel skin curling black on the agonized hand, the flesh crisping and dropping away until only charred bones remained. It stopped. As though a switch had been turned off, the pain stopped. Paul felt his right arm trembling, felt sweat bathing his body. "Enough!" the old woman muttered. "Cool, lad. No woman-child ever withstood that must. I must have wanted you to fall." She leaned back, withdrawing the Gum Jabbar from the side of his neck. "Take your hand from the box, young human, and look at it." He fought down an aching shiver, stared at the lightless void where his hand seemed to remain of its own volition. Memory of pain inhibited every movement. Reason told him he would withdraw a blackened stump from that box. "Do it!" she snapped. He jerked his hand free from the box and stared at it, astonished. Not a mark, no sign of agony on the flesh. He held up the hand and turned it, flexing the fingers. "Pain by nerve induction," she said. "Can't go around maiming potential humans. There are those who'd give a pretty for the secret of this box, though." She slipped it back into the folds of her gown. "But the pain," he said. "Pain?" she sniffed. "A human can override any nerve in the body." Paul felt his left hand aching, uncurled the clenched fingers, looked down at the 4 bloody marks where his fingernails had bitten into his palm. He dropped the hand to his side and looked at the old woman. "You did that to my mother once." "Ever sift sand through a screen?" she asked. The tangential slash of her question shocked his mind into a higher awareness. Sand through a screen, he nodded. "Bene Gesserit sift people to find humans." He lifted his right hand, willing the memory of the pain. "And that's all there is to it? Pain?" "I observed you in pain, lad. Pain is merely the access of the test. Your mothers told you of our ways of observation. I see the signs of her teaching in you. Our test is crisis and observation." He heard the confirmation in her voice and said, "It's the truth." She stared at him. He senses truth. Could he be the one? Could he truly be the one? She extinguished the excitement, reminding herself, hope clouds observation. "You know when people believe what they say," she said. "I know it." Harmonics of ability confirmed by repeated tests were in his voice. She heard them and said, "Perhaps you are the Kwisatz Haderach. Sit down, little brother, here at my feet. I prefer to stand. Your mother sat at my feet once. I am not my mother." "You hate us a little, eh?" She looked towards the door and called out, "Jessica!" The door flew open and Jessica stood there, staring hard-eyed into the room. Hardness melted from her as she saw Paul and managed a faint smile. "Jessica, have you ever stopped hating me?" the old woman asked. "I both love you and hate you," she said. "The hate, that's from pains I must never forget. The love, that's just the basic fact," the old woman said, but her voice was gentle. "You may come in now, but remain silent. Close the door and mind that no one interrupts us." Jessica stepped into the room, closed the door, and stood with her back to it. "My son lives," she thought. "My son lives and is human. I knew he was, but he lives. Now I can go on living." The door felt hard against her back. Everything in the room was immediate and pressing against her senses. "My son lives." Paul looked at his mother. She told the truth. He wanted to get away alone, to think of this experience. He knew he could not leave until he was dismissed, though. The old woman had gained a power over him. They spoke truth. His mother had undergone this test, and there must be a terrible purpose in it. The pain and fear, they had been terrible. He understood terrible purposes. They drove against all odds. They were their own necessity. Paul felt that he had been infected with a terrible purpose. He did not yet know what that terrible purpose was. "Someday, lad," the old woman said, "you too may have to stand outside a door like that. It takes a measure of doing." Paul looked down at the hand that had known pain, and then up to the Reverend Mother. The sound of her voice had contained